Welcome to Creating Art with Jenny. Today I'm going to watercolor an orange and help you give you some good tips on how to do it as well. I have oranges in abundance on my tree. They are beautiful and they smell great and the color is just amazing. I went ahead and began. I'm on 300-pound Arches watercolor paper and I did I drew my orange and I lightly did it in any pencil marks that I had left, and you can see it's a faint thing. I did go in and kind of pick it up with my kneadable eraser. It's a easy way to still see the faint lines but then not to see it once you start painting. I am going to start with a base layer of my Hansa medium yellow. I feel like this gives me a good little brightness to my start. So as I begin, I'm going to go ahead and just start. I'm going to paint everything in here with just my yellow, and then you'll be able to see my orange a little bit better. So remember, when you are painting, it's nice to have good quality paper. Maybe when you're not starting, because you do tend to make a lot of mistakes, but it also, what I do find when you use good watercolor paper, it's so much more forgiving, and it holds your watercolor paint so much better, and it's just easier to create a transition of paints and mixing. And if you don't like something, it's just way more forgivable than anything else. I'm going to go ahead and paint my stem in a yellow as well. And as I'm doing this, I'm trying to keep a consistent base of color. And what I mean consistent base of color of wetness is what I should say. And when you do that, it just dries basically about the same time. And you don't have any puddles, and one area is not drying darker than the other. Alright, so now that that's all colored in, painted in, I'm going to let it dry, and then I am going to also, once it dries, when it comes back, you'll see that I have masked out the base right here, which is of a, it tends to be more white yellow, so I'm going to leave that because and when I mask it out, it just will be easier to paint around it. My base is dry. Now I'm ready to apply my colors to my orange. I'm going to show you up here my little swatch of what I'm using. I am using a cad yellow orange for my base, and at the top I'm going to have it a little less thick, so I want it to be bright at the top, and then as I come down, I'm moving into more of a brighter orange to show the brightness. And then I also need to show my shadow. So my shadow is mixed with cad yellow, the cad yellow orange, and some pyrrole red. And the pyrrole red will create the shadow down below to create the more of the 3D effect. So these are my colors that I've chosen to distinguish, to give my orange shape and value. And I am consistently always I use a Viva paper towel. That's just the most absorbent, and I just love it. So let's get started. As I'm starting, I'm using more water on the top, and as I move down, I really want to be careful to try to not put too much water, because I don't want my edges to dry with a line, and so I want the water base to be consistent. So I'm going to start at the top. Oh, and I forgot to mask that out, but that's okay. I can be careful coming around it, and it's also with the first brightness, it's really okay to leave that. So you can see I have my yellow right here. I'll make sure I get my line in here, and my orange, and then as I'm coming down, I want to go ahead and move to a stronger, to a orange. And even though that's bleeding into my leaf, I can actually kind of pick that up. That's fine to do that. And this is what I mean by when you have a nice watercolor paper, you really can take your time, make sure the edges. And another thing I like about the arches is that it does, for an orange, you can see the bumpiness and texture of the watercolor paper, so it kind of helps, especially when you're painting something with texture, to show that. So as I come down, I want to start adding my shadows in here with this mixture of the Pyro Red. Letting it mix right here on the paper. Maybe making it thinner as it's coming over here. And then I want to come back to my orange, because I want my orange, my main orange, because I do want it to be bright and happy. I know that sounds weird, but paintings can be happy. And I can tell that it's mixing, like my edges, and while it's still wet, I'm going to come in, because I don't want to do this once it's dry. And I might even want to come in and maybe add some darker color up here a little bit, trying to preserve some of that highlight. So you can see it bleeding and starting to mix, and that's what I'm looking for. And it's okay that that's over here. I can even come over here and just kind of smooth that out a little bit. It's fine. So overall, I'm looking for my smoothness of my edges. I want to show more of a value change over here. I'm not looking to create a hard line over here, so making sure I'm picking up any water that's sitting over here on the edge. And showing, you know, directional. You can come in a little bit while it's still wet and add a little bit of directional. Maybe add a little bit more shading. But I don't want to overwork it too much, because then you start picking up paint, which is not something I really want to do. Alright, I'm going to let it dry. My orange is still continuing to dry, and to differentiate this from looking too much like a peach, I do want to come in and use a sharper edge of my pointy tool to create some of the divots that you actually see on the oranges. And they do not have to be all over the oranges, but just a few places to help show the texture. So it's not, like I said, it's not completely dry just yet, and so I want to take advantage of that, because the darker colors will kind of seep in there, and it will help you to see some of the texture of the orange that's showing through. And this is actually a sewing tool that I use. I don't use it for sewing anymore. I actually use it just for my art. Alright, so I only did a few. You don't need to do a lot, but it just helps to show that it's more of an orange than a peach. So my base of my orange is dry, and I'm going to start on my leaf. And as I do my leaf, I will be using 3 different greens. I'm going to start with an azo green over on this side, and I like the azo green because it's more of an olive aged type green. And what I like about it is that it helps to really show a aging once you start mixing it with the other colors on the edges. You know how like leaves get that aging on the side, and then it's also just kind of, it's a nice little base underneath. And then I'm using sap green over on this side, and you know I had some of that orange come over here. It's actually fine because it creates a bit of a darkness, and it can also show some more texture like, so it's all good. There's not a perfect green leaf. Well, there may be, but not in my paintings. I like things to look like they really did come from nature, like you really did just go out and pick this. Always drop in a little bit of perylene green too, just to create some darkness on the edge. And as I'm painting my stem, I'm going to leave a little bit of the yellow on top. I just like the contrast and the brightness that it shows on that. And I'm not going to go all the way down. And I'm not going to worry about the fact that I actually did not leave that as white as I wanted it to. It will be fine. I'll show you how we're going to deal with that. So I'm just thinking about what it is I want to add to my leaf. And I am coming in a little bit of perylene on the side to create some depth and some value. And then again, I do like to see the vein coming through, so I just kind of use my sharp thing. You know, you can even use a broken credit card to do the side. It's really great. Just when you cut those credit cards up, save part of it and put it in your art supplies. It works great. I don't know. I used to use a broken credit card. I actually don't know what happened to mine. So that's why I found my sewing tool, and I was like, oh, well, that'll work. Okay, so I'm going to leave that right there, let it dry, and then I'm going to come back and put in some shadows and add some darkness. My leaf is dry. I'm ready to come in and do the shadow on the orange from the leaf, and I'm actually going to use the same color here under the shadow for the leaf. And I'm going to just do a simple line. Following it down, giving it some life. And as the leaf curls out at the end, to show my object is round, I'm going to come in and just bring it down like that and curved in to show the curvature of the leaf. Alright, so there's my shadow, and it does seem kind of bright, but it's okay. You know, so much of what you paint in watercolor, I want to be realistic, but I also want it to be fun and lively, and I like the color of it. It's a shadow. I can tell it's a shadow. That's what I'm going for. I could have chosen to do a darker shadow, but like I said, when you do that, I don't want my painting to become completely dark. I want it to be light and lively. So now that I've gotten my leaf shadow in there, I need to think of my base shadow, and this is the one that you have to be very careful about. As I am doing my base shadow, I'm going to use a mixture of what I used here, but I'm also adding in some purple. I want it to be, I don't want it to be too dark. I want it to be in the same type of value as my orange. And so as you're painting your base value, you really do want it to be just, you know, this, it's like a flat wash. You really do want it to be smooth and of one color. So not that you have to get it right the very first time, but it does help if you do. So as I think about my leaf, I want it to think about, I'm not very good at thinking about what it might look like. I'm very spatially challenged, but I want it to give it some life. So I'm going to come around, and as I'm coming up to my orange, I'm going to be very careful to not go into my orange, but just to touch the base. And sometimes I have to, sorry about this, I have to turn my page, my paper, just to allow me to do that a little bit better. I do turn my paper quite a bit, and I don't think there's a rule that says you can't do that. So, but I have messed up many paintings by not being super careful around the edges of where I was putting my shadow. So I really do want to think about that and think about a smooth outside and what do you want it to look like. So once you kind of get it, then you can come in and paint it. And like, I don't want it to have any bumps. I really want it to be smooth. And I'm going to come back this way and make my edges smooth. That's what I'm looking for, and the same flatness. So like I said, having really nice watercolor paper really does allow you sometimes to create a nicer wash, and it gives you, it's more forgiving than cheap watercolor paper. And when you're learning, it's fine to learn on cheap watercolor paper, because that's where you don't want to be so afraid of painting that you just don't do it because you're like, oh, I don't want to mess it up, the paper's too expensive. No, don't do that. I spent years painting on inexpensive watercolor paper, and I still kind of do sometimes, especially before I start doing things. So as this is coming up, I'm going to start picking up some of my paint. I don't want the edges to be super harsh, and I'm just about done messing with it because I need it to be to dry evenly. So I'm going to call that a day. You actually can, once your shadow does dry, you can go back in and try it. I love how my leaf turned out. It's an aged leaf on a beautiful orange. And oh, I need to go back in. I forgot to add some darker value. I'm going to just use go in and Perylene green right down here, just to add some very slight depth and aging. Nothing too dramatic. And maybe come back in a little bit with some olive, kind of mix that up, make it look a little bit more natural, because it's not going to all be the same color. And you have to be careful. Sometimes really harsh edges can make things look unnatural. So in watercolor, you always want a combination of soft edge, hard edge. Okay, well, there's my orange. The only thing I don't really like is that it goes back right here. I don't know if I can fix it. Sometimes, like I said, if you mess with things, you can kind of mess it up. But I think because it's just such a tiny thing, I'm just going to go back and lighten that. And this is not the best little brush I've ever had, but that will do though. It kind of softens it up. Alright, well, I hope that you can go out and paint oranges today, and I hope that you are able to learn something from my tutorial. Have a good day.